I love it so much I'm going to stay in Chautauqua for the month of July this year. You're going to get me whether you want me or not. As a matter of fact, I was in Jamestown, sort of, a couple of months ago. I was out in Los Angeles, in Hollywood, to speak with Paramount, having to do with the screenplay for Stargirl, for the movie. And they were giving us a tour of the Paramount lot, and we came to Lucille Ball's, to Lucy's office, which she had her own office on the Paramount studio lot. And she missed her hometown of Jamestown so much that she asked if they would create her neighborhood outside her office window. And so they did that. A little row of houses there and appropriate landscaping, so that whenever she went to work, to her office there in Hollywood, she could look out her office window and see her old neighborhood in Jamestown. And she died some years ago, of course, but they've kept it as a memorial to her. And so you go and take yourself a tour of the studio lot there at Paramount now in Hollywood, and there's a little pocket of Jamestown. Milkweed is the story for the day, and let's hear how it begins, the first minute or so. Memory. I'm running. That's the first thing I remember, running. I carry something, my arm curled around it, hugging it to my chest. Bread, of course. Someone is chasing me. Stop, thief! I run. People, shoulders, shoes. Stop, thief! Sometimes it is a dream. Sometimes it is a memory in the middle of the day, as I stir iced tea or wait for soup to heat. I never see who is chasing and calling me. I never stop long enough to eat the bread. When I awaken from dream or memory, my legs are tingling. Summer. He was dragging me, running. He was much bigger. My feet skimmed over the ground. Sirens were screaming. His hair was red. We flew through streets and alleyways. There were thumping noises, like distant thunder. The people we bounced off didn't seem to notice us. The sirens were screaming like babies. At last we plunged into a dark hole. You're lucky, he said. Soon it won't be ladies chasing you, it will be jackboots. Jackboots, I said. You'll see. I wondered who the jackboots were. Were unfooted boots running around the streets? Okay, he said. Hand it over. Hand what over? I said. He reached into my shirt and pulled out the loaf of bread. He broke it in half. He shoved one half at me and began to eat the other. You're lucky I didn't kill you, he said. That lady you took this from, I was just getting ready to snatch it for myself. I'm lucky, I said. He burped. You're quick. You took it before I even knew it happened. That lady was rich. Did you see the way she was dressed? She'll just buy 10 more. I ate my bread. More thumping sounds in the distance. What is that? I asked him. Jackboot artillery, he said. What's artillery? Big guns, boom, boom. They're shelling the city. He stared at me. Who are you? I didn't understand the question. I'm Yuri, he said. What's your name? I gave him my name. Stop thief. And so the story begins. But how did the writing of the story begin? Different stories have different beginnings. Different writings have different beginnings. I remember one, in first person down to the kitchen. Early one morning. Darby Road, Havertown, Pennsylvania. I go to the refrigerator to get my lunch. I had left my lunch in a brown paper bag to take to work the next day. Fried chicken. Open the refrigerator, take out the bag, open it. Something's wrong. There's chicken bones in the bag, but no meat on them. It seems that somebody has eaten the meat off my chicken bones, put the bones back in the bag, and put the bag back in the refrigerator. Anybody with kids knows what I'm talking about. Well, I knew that one of my 6 sleeping angels upstairs had stolen my fried chicken. 6, yeah. Yeah. And I knew nobody would confess. You guys don't confess, do you? No. So I went to work that day, fried chickenless, and when lunchtime came, I closed my office door, and I guess because it was still on my mind, whatever, I began to write about the fried chicken incident, and kind of imagined how it might have gone if I knew who did it. And I started writing it from the point of view of the kid that I imagined did it. Little did I know it, I was beginning to write a book. As it turned out, that was my first published book. Another beginning. It's going through my head one day. An old schoolyard chant. 1st grade babies, 2nd grade cats, 3rd grade angels, 4th grade rats. I said, wow, there's a title, 4th grade rats. And so I took some time off, cooked up a story to go with the title, and now you can buy a book called 4th grade rats. Who here remembers a song? I don't know, around 1960 or so. Martha and the Vandellas, Dancing in the Street. Anybody? Any of you old people here remember that? That was the original inspiration for a book called Maniac McGee. A couple of kids, 2 of those 6 sleeping angels upstairs. 2 of them were Molly and Jeffrey. Molly and Jeffrey hated each other. Always fighting, making noise. If I had locked them in a closet, going back 5 minutes later, I would have found them both dead. I figured I'll write a book about sibling warfare. Molly became Megan, Megamouth. Jeffrey became Greg, or El Grosso, and the story of their warfare became my second book, Who Put That Hair in My Toothbrush? Beginnings. How did Milkweed begin? Many years ago, George Street, Norristown, Pennsylvania, the living room of my house. I'm sitting cross-legged on the rug, looking at my father's picture books, and I'm seeing heaps. Pictures of heaps and piles. Well, what comes in heaps? What comes in piles? In the supermarket, oranges, apples, scrap tires, old scrapped junk cars, stones, rocks, right? I'm seeing things that I recognize as piles, but I don't recognize what kind of piles they are. I'm turning these pictures this way and that, and it's not making sense to me. And then it begins to register with me. I'm 4 years old, a little kid. It begins to register me that it looks a little kind of like people. Actually, more like skeletons than people. Like bones with nothing but skin draped over them like cellophane. And I don't know what I'm seeing. I don't know at this point anything of hatred and racism and war and so forth. It gets my attention, but I really don't understand it. Years go by. I continue to look at these pictures. I begin to read about this thing called the Holocaust. And I do something that I didn't realize at the time was going to have quite an influence on my life. I begin to care about them. I begin to see them as more than piles of bodies. I begin to wonder, who were the people? that inhabited those bodies. What were they like? Were they like me? I began to care. Well, let's skip forward many decades to an afternoon in my office. And I'm sitting there, and my wife Eileen comes in, and she says, interesting story here. And she tells me about something she read in a book, just a paragraph, a little incident, about one of the ghettos. And of course, in the ghettos, for the most part, the only time you were allowed to pass freely through the gate was when you were dead. Well, it so happens that there was a victim of the ghetto and his family, and he was a pharmacist. And he decided there was one way that he could somehow take advantage of that situation, that loophole, so to speak. He gave his child a drug that put him to sleep, and to a casual observer would appear that he was dead. Took a drawer out of a cabinet, placed the child in the cabinet as a kind of makeshift coffin, and carried it on his shoulder, a one-man funeral procession, to the gate. Was allowed to pass through the gate long enough to deposit his son's body in the kind of Potter's Field cemetery dump outside the wall of the ghetto. Left the child in the makeshift coffin there, and returned to his destiny on the other side of the wall. Nightfall comes, the child awakens, and runs away, and escapes. For some reason, everything came together at that point. Years and years of caring about what I originally saw in those pictures on my father's living room, and wondering if I should someday write a book and take my own advice, which I tell kids. If you have any advice for kids who want to become writers, I always say, write what you care about. Well, this is something that I cared about all my life. But I hesitated to write about it because I thought, well, what are my credentials? What right do I have to write about this subject? It's not as if the world needs another book about the Holocaust. There are thousands of them. Who needs another one? Especially from somebody with no credentials. I wasn't a survivor. I wasn't Jewish. Who's going to want to hear from me? But I did have one credential, and maybe it's the only one that counts. I cared. And so when Eileen told me the story about how the child got out of the ghetto, was smuggled out of the ghetto as a fake funeral, it just kind of hit me at that moment, maybe it's the time to take my own advice and write what I care about. And so I began to make notes for the book that eventually became Milkweed. I did research. Don't usually do research. Don't like to do research, frankly. But I kind of had to this time. So I read books, so forth, and got a map of the Warsaw Ghetto, made a photocopy of it, put it on my wall next to the computer. A lot of the things that happened in the book really did happen. They were real events. There really was a cow. Hitler's number 2 guy, really did visit the Warsaw Ghetto. There really were breaks in the wall. from one of the books I read. The walls encircling the ghetto were built of brick. Where the wall crossed a roadway, there remained an opening, some 2 bricks in diameter. For a while I thought of calling the book 2 Bricks. Above the gutters, through which water from the Jewish gutter flowed into the Aryan one, a small Jewish child could wriggle on to the other side through such a hole, carry back small quantities of food. There really were little smugglers. Again. For a long time, I got our milk supply from a woman whose child, a beautiful 8-year-old blonde boy, used to crawl through a hole at night to contact his mother's former maid, who still lived on the other side, in order to get milk. The boy could get through the small opening, but the milk cans were too big. So a tinsmith in the ghetto had made a special long, narrow container to enable the boy to perform his nightly task. The boy had been returning with his loads of milk at dawn. On the other side of the wall, time dragged for the restlessly waiting mother. At last, his name was Shulek. At last she heard Shulek's whistle. She answered with a sigh of relief. The first can appeared, then the second. And then little Shulek forced his little hands and head through. His mother was already holding his feeble hips when a shot rang out. In the daylight, a German soldier had spotted the small feet of the big criminal who had no right to live. He shot and hit one of the child's legs. His mother pulled the boy out, and a doctor dressed his wound, but the bone was shattered into small pieces, and so the leg had to be amputated. After a few weeks, however, the milk appeared again. Little Shulek took up his neglected duties. "Oh, I am quite all right," he answered cheerfully when I inquired after his health. "And it doesn't matter at all. I can make it even without the crutch, because I can hop very well." There really were orphans, and a Dr. Korczak. People really were hosed with water in the middle of the winter. My problem was to take these things and not so much make them up, but arrange them into a meaningful story. For the most part, except for Dr. Korczak, the characters I did make up. I had given them different names, actually, to begin with, some of them. For example, you would not know that Misha was originally called Yumpy. And when I decided to change the name, I had to do my search and change thing on the computer, you know, and I pressed change all, and it changed 46 times from Yumpy to Misha. A couple other things, Yuri had originally been Zossi, and that changed 197 times. Jolina became Janina, and that changed 240 times. So that was some of my own self-editing. If there's any originality at all in the book, perhaps to some extent it's the point of view of the character himself. To have a boy, a character, a narrator, who is almost virtually born at the age of 2 or 3 or 4 onto the streets of Warsaw with no memory. So that it's almost as if the catastrophe itself gave birth to the character. Which doesn't mean that everything, when I started making those notes that day after Eileen told me the story, not everything stuck. That's the way it is. You might have 500 pages of notes and you wind up using about 10% of it. So not everything made it into the final story. You've heard of movie outtakes. There are also outtakes from a book, things that never made it into the final book. For example, this is Misha. Was I afraid? Yes, I was afraid. I was afraid constantly, sometimes terrified. But it was a different kind of terror from that of the others, especially the grown-ups. Their fear was complicated by memories of how it felt to be unafraid. I had no such memories. My fear was pure, natural, uncomplicated. It went in and out of my lungs like oxygen, like the lice in my hair, like the dirt between my toes. What makes a person and not a puff of milkweed? A name, a label, a parent, a place, a history, a memory. Yes, I have a history. I have memories, but how much does a memory weigh? I want to feel the pull of something, a tug on my own mass. The scale lies. I believe I have no weight at all. I believe it is only the 2 jacks in my pocket that anchor me to earth. Remember, he used to play jacks with Janina. That if I throw them away, I will sail off like a milkweed puff. Brains and heart, you say? I don't think so. I have seen brains and heart beaten away, and still you would have said that was a person. I no longer keep an eye out for angels. If they're around, they know where to find me. Maybe it comes to this. Because I was nobody, I became everybody. Someone asked me last night, Misha, toward the end, is walking down the tracks. The war is about to end. He's out of the ghetto, finally free after a fashion. Why didn't you end the book then? Why doesn't it stop there? My answer is that because in the end, this is really not the story. This is not a story of the war, or a ghetto, or a brick wall. It is the story of a person. And it is decidedly that. A story, not a history. The history books tell us that there was a Holocaust, one Holocaust of 6 million people. I like to think of it differently. I like to think that there were 6 million Holocausts of one. Another outtake, history. What do historians know of it? Did they know Janina? Did they see her eyes searching for me as the jackboots tossed her into a boxcar? Holocaust. A word. It is silly to give it a name, a word. Hopeless. The only way you can approach it in words is to say Holocaust 6 million times in a row. And even that won't get you close. So you see, each story ends only with the end of that person's Holocaust. In some ways, when the war comes to an end, Misha's problems are just beginning. Listen to this. The world was returning to normal, but for me, there was no normal to return to. Normal for me was stolen bread and ditch water. Little by little, I had to learn about forks and money and toothpaste and toilets. I was born into craziness. When the whole world turned crazy, I was ready for it. That's how I survived. I was already there. And when the craziness was over, where did that leave me? Misha's story, Misha's Holocaust, cannot end until his little granddaughter, the second Janina, climbs onto his lap in the last page and gives him the last name he will ever need. She plops down on my lap. Rock, Poppy Noodle. I rock. I smile. I close my eyes. I think of all the voices that have told me who I have been, the names I've had. Call me thief, call me stupid, call me gypsy, call me Jew, call me one-eared Jack. I don't care. Empty-handed victims once told me who I was. Then Yuri told me. Then an armband told me. Then an immigration officer. And now, this little girl in my lap. This little girl whose call silences, finally, the tramping jackboots. Her voice will be the last. I was. Now, I am. I am. Poppy Noodle. And so ends, what, a half a century, more than a half a century later, the story that began, you might say, when I sat in my father's living room, cross-legged, looking at pictures of piles of things that I didn't understand. And a story that would lead me one day to Jamestown and talk to a bunch of 8th graders who were taking full advantage of the opportunity to get out of school. That's my story of my story, and we have a few minutes left, and I'm told that we're going to take a few questions.
I'll start with where we began today, and that was last night we had a chance to listen to Dr. Fagan and her poignant address concerning her experience at the Warsaw Ghetto and the lesson learned therefrom. We also saw an 8-minute movie on the Warsaw Ghetto. And to you, Jerry, having written a book about the Warsaw Ghetto, try to make sense out of all that. What does that mean to you? What emotion did you have after that?
I write books for a living. And sometimes you get caught, especially if you're lucky enough to have some success. And You walk into bookstores and you see your books and people read them and they ask you for your autograph and you get fan mail and all this stuff. And people pat you on the back, and boy, it seems great. You know, and sometimes if you're not careful, you can get fooled into thinking, man, this is where it's at. These stories. This isn't where it's at. This is just a reflection. You could read every word of Shakespeare, and it would not be as real or as meaningful as 5 seconds of real experience. It's real life that is our foundation. And so, when someone comes to us, like Dr. Fagan, who was there, and who did not write a book, but lived a life, who did not tell of the event, but participated in the event, that is a resource and a treasure whose value is immeasurable. And as she mentioned, will one day disappear, as will we all. And so all the more reason to value the people who remain and who can tell us what it was really like.
Thank you. I have a question from one of the writing contest winners, Jensen Reckhow, and she writes, what was your inspiration for the Misha character?
Not sure, really. I do remember talking to someone, a survivor, and actually, Helen, I didn't speak to a lot of survivors, just one really that I recall that I had access to. And I recall him saying that his first memory was when he was really little. The first thing he recalled, we all have something we remember, our first memory, you know. His first memory was standing as a little kid next to a wall, a crumbled wall that had been destroyed by a bomb or something, and he's standing next to this crumbling stone wall, and that's his first memory on earth of his life. And I don't know, it might have kind of had, as unlikely as it sounds, that might have been the beginning moment of the idea to create a character who had no memory, except whose first memory, in effect, was finding himself running away from somebody with a loaf of bread in his hand.
Another contest winner, Daniel Claridge, asks, I've noticed that most of your books involve very complex and interesting characters, mostly young boys that don't quite fit in. I've always wondered why you chose to create these characters. I know a lot of authors write about their past experiences, and I was wondering if that's how you drew your inspiration for your characters and books.
I do use my past quite a bit, I would say, yeah. Although I wouldn't say that I don't know that I was so much of a maverick myself. But hey, look, if there's 100 people and 99 of them are running south and one is running north, who do you want to read about? Who's interesting, you know? So in a sense, it simply comes down to that. The people who are not in the herd. What I'm interested in is not the person who wakes up in the morning and says, "Okay, what's everybody else going to wear? How's everybody else going to act? How's everybody else going to talk? How's everybody else going to think? That's how I'm going to do it." I'm interested in the person that wakes up in the morning and that says, "Well, I think I'm going to dress the way I want to dress." and I'm going to talk the way I want to talk, and I'm going to think the way I want to think. That's the one that's interesting to me.
We have a question from Frusberg, which states, what is the significance of milkweed, the plant?
Well, it provides a nice kind Helen can tell you this much more than I can. But, you know, almost everything was gone in the ghetto toward the later stages. There was no green to be seen. There were no trees. They had been cut down for firewood. People had chopped up their furniture and so forth. You know, nothing virtually of any color or of any life or of any vitality was left. They were lucky to even hear the voice of a songbird, crows and flies. What would happen if two characters in an alley came across a weed? There were still weeds. And maybe it was milkweed. These little pods, about this big, milkweed pod. It's sort of in the shape of the body of a sparrow, kind of like that. And these pods break open in the fall, and the milkweed puffs, little cottony, white cottony puffs, kind of like, little like dandelions, little like dandelion puffs, except bigger. Burst out of the pod and float into the sky. Wouldn't that make an impression on a couple of kids that find themselves trapped in the ghetto, to see this pod opening and to see the puffs escaping into the sunlit sky in a way that they could not? It seems to me that someone telling such a story, remembering it over the years, that moment, that those milkweed puffs would come to represent more and more a counterpoint to the grim circumstances in which they really found themselves.
A student from Forestville writes, how did writing this book affect you emotionally?
Writing the book didn't affect me emotionally any more than looking at those piles of bodies affected me years before, and over the years, over the decades, reading the stories of survivors and so forth. My emotional reaction was prorated over the course of a half a century, so that when I came to write the book, it wasn't a new emotional experience at all for me, because after all, I was writing what I cared about. So I was mostly occupied with the problems of writing an effective story and trying to tell the story as well as possible.
We have a student from Faulkner who writes, in Milkweed, why is there more happening in the fall and winter than in spring or summer?
I don't know. That's news to me. Whoever noticed that, congratulations. People are always, one of the interesting things about being a writer is that your readers make you aware of things that you didn't even know you put in the book. So that if that's the case, I don't think it's by design. It's probably just an accident. Perhaps for some reason I may have felt that doing things in the colder weather maybe offered more poignant and dramatic opportunities for episodes and moments, maybe something like that. Somehow it seems even as if it's not bad enough in the summer, sometimes things can be even worse in the winter because it's just compounded all the more by the cold.
A student from Faulkner, another one. At the start of the story, why didn't Misha know anything about his background or his early childhood?
Well, the simple answer to that is because I didn't want him to. It's my story, and I can tell it any way I want. And I wanted a character. People sometimes ask me, why did you kill off Grayson, the old man that Maniac McGee lived with? And the reason I killed off Grayson was because I wanted to see how Maniac McGee would react if he was totally alone. That's why I killed off Grayson. And so I had Misha born into a world without any memories of where he'd come from, without any parents to tell him who he was. But we find him totally alone. And there were such kids. There were such kids. I wanted to do that because that's the point of view I wanted. That's the direction that I wanted the story to take.
Question from Fredonia. What happened to the first Janina? Did she live or die? Was Yuri a spy for the German cause?
We can only assume that Janina met the same fate as practically everyone else who boarded those boxcars. We just assume that, and beyond that, we don't know for absolutely sure. Was Yuri a spy for the Germans? No, it's just the opposite. Remember, he had red hair. He didn't have what they considered to be typical Jewish appearance. And so he was able, and since he spoke German well, he was able to impersonate the Germans, the Nazis. I should refer to them as Nazis, not Germans. And so he was able to gain a certain advantage, and that's why he could come to Misha at one point toward the end of the book and warn him to get out of town, to run and to not get on the trains, because he knew what was coming.
You've published 26 books. There aren't many people who can say that had that success, Jerry Spinelli, and many of the folks are here because they wanted to see you and know of your tremendous work product. What's next?
The next one is in the hands of my editor at the moment, and it will probably come out toward the end of the year or next year, and it's called Smiles to Go. And the one I'm just beginning to work on, at least at the moment, I'm calling it Dear Leo, and it's going to be a sequel to Stargirl.
To sort of draw closure to this extraordinary hour, I wonder if, Jerry, there's a message that you would like to leave with these 8th graders who have been so patient, congratulations, and listened so intently to you. Is there a message that you would like them to have, having concluded the reading of Milkweed?
I wouldn't presume to add any message to what Dr. Fagan has already said about remembering and taking this story and stories like this and memories like hers into your hearts and dedicating yourself that these things will not happen again, and at the very least that you will not contribute to events like this. Beyond that, let's just all be happy that the occasion that brings the buses to this place and you kids into these seats is not a video game, but a book. And isn't that nice that kids are still reading, and that books can provide the occasion for us to get together at times like this. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Jerry Spinelli.